Good afternoon. I'm Danuta Nitesky, Dean of Drexel Libraries, and I'm excited to welcome you to the inaugural event for the library's newest event series, Promoting Diversity Through Drexel's Archival and Special Collections. I'll ask that you all mute yourselves during this presentation to cut out the background noise and submit any questions or comments you might have through the chat right from the bottom. And we will then have time to address them at the end of the presentation. So we're launching this series as part of our longstanding support of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the libraries as an organization, in the historic record, and in our authoritative information resources, events, and other activities. This event series will be a forum that facilitates conversations and connections to issues of diversity and inclusion among the Drexel community and beyond, by bringing to life the contributions historically marginalized communities have made to Drexel University, the city of Philadelphia, and beyond. We are still in the process of finalizing future speakers and event details for this series, but we plan to feature collections from the Drexel University Archives, the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel University, the Legacy Center at the College of Medicine, and more. Look for announcements about future events this summer. So now I'm very pleased to introduce our inaugural event guest speaker, the Westfall College of Media Arts and Design professor, Toby Seay, who serves as project director for the Drexel Audio Archives. He will take us on a virtual tour of the Audio Archives, home to the Sigma Sound Studios collection. Begun in the late 1960s, the Sigma Studios was known for producing the Philly soul, and the sound of Philadelphia, a period of musical innovation deeply rooted in the city's Black community. But I'll let Toby tell you more. With that, I'll turn the Zoom controls over to Professor Seay, who will tell us more about the Drexel Audio Archives and the Sigma Sound Studios collection. Thanks very much, Toby, for doing this. Are we hearing him?
Second. There we go. We have a bit of a delay on this end. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Danuta. I'm really happy to be here. And excuse any clunkiness or noisy issues, because I'm going to try to do something today which isn't the easiest thing to do with a Zoom call, and that's we're going to move about the archive, see some of the materials, describe some of the stuff, and describe what's here, why we collect it, and issues about preserving specifically audiovisual materials, and how audiovisual materials is a huge source of evidence for cultural heritage, human engagement. So I want to talk a bit about that as well. And then I want to play some stuff. Philadelphia was one of the most prominent Black music centers in the late 60s into the 70s and 80s. If you think of Detroit and Motown, Memphis and Stax, Atlantic Records in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, Philadelphia and Sigma Sound Studios and Philly International Records is in that gathering of significant commercial recordings of Black-centered music. And Sigma Sound Studios, which was at 212 North 12th Street in downtown Philly, followed along after Philadelphia's long engagement with popular culture, with American Bandstand being here, and then that form of music popularity kind of waning, and then soul music taking off in the mid-60s. And it was the place to be. And it was an amazing culture of music production. So with that, I want to kind of walk around the studio, or around the archives a bit, kind of show off what we have, and then talk about how it got here, and kind of give you a glimpse of what we mean by an audiovisual archive. So in just a second, I'm going to get up. I'm going to be off camera, so I'm not going to see any of you all for a while. So be here in a second. Yeah, I'll just start here. All right. So we are at One Drexel Plaza, and here in One Drexel Plaza, the music industry program moved here a few years ago. It was a $5.5 million build, which gave us our flagship recording studio, some other recording studios, our computer teaching labs, and of course the new space for the archives. What you're seeing here are just shelves and shelves full of magnetic tape. Music production from the late 50s onward was predominantly done on magnetic tape. What this collection shows is from about 1968 to about the year 2000. Magnetic tape used in that period. Then there was the transition to digital. We have some born digital materials here, but most of it is tape. What you're seeing behind me is the biggest tape. This is 2-inch, and it starts in 1970 here. 2-inch tape is 16 track to start with, eventually goes to 24 track. And I put this right here at the beginning of the archive because when you walk into this space, you see a lot of the big names that people think of Philadelphia. We have the Sweet Inspirations, we have Stevie Wonder, we have the David Bowie tape that everyone talks about. But what happened at Sigma, it was a commercial facility, so anybody that wanted to come and record could. Yes, Philly soul music was made there, but a lot of other things was as well. So you'll see a large selection of very diverse amount of materials. I bring that up because the question is, why are these tapes here? And in about 2003, Sigma stopped operations. And when that happened, they spent a huge amount of time and effort and expense trying to find all of the owners of the tapes to get them back to their creators. What was not then refound as far as owners was then donated to Drexel because it was then considered pretty much abandoned property. So what you see in this room is about 7,000 reels of tape, and I could be not right on this exactly, but about 13 different formats. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to find an odd format stuck in the shelves here. So about 7,000 reels of tape, and that's just what was left behind. Why would something be left behind? Maybe they didn't pay for it. That happens. Maybe they took the tapes that have the that you hear on the record if you buy it in the store, but there's other tapes associated with that project that they didn't need and they left that behind. And sometimes things just got forgotten and never made it out. So what you see here is a really interesting look at the process of making records and what things made it, what things didn't, and how certain projects were recorded. We do not have, for instance, the Philly International Records tapes. And yet we still have this massive amount. That shows you how much was being done in Philadelphia. So I'm just kind of going to walk down the shelves here and show you kind of the bulk of it. We're now in the 24 track tapes. For instance, here's a set of Sly Stone tapes. That wasn't done at Sigma. That was done in San Francisco, but it was brought here for mixing purposes, so that would end up getting left behind. So we're in 24 track tapes, and that leads us all the way into the 1990s for the most part. You will see that you have a lot of labels falling off where this metadata is simply handwritten at the time of the sessions, and this is what we have to go on. So this is obviously a preservation problem. But I know a lot of Sigma people will walk through here and instantly recognize their own handwriting. So this is what we call multi-track tape. And I'll talk about that a bit later when we get back over to the tape machine. But with that multi-track tape, as we come around, we also have boxes of other things. Probably the most current short-lived format is the DAT tape, and this is digital stereo recording on a little cassette. These are from the 90s for the most part, and early 2000s. Those are digital, but they are tape-based, so they have their own set of preservation issues. I'm going to go down this particular shelf because this particular shelf has what we call quarter-inch tape. I'm going to just pull a tape off the shelf randomly and show you that what oftentimes comes with these tapes is the tape itself and very limited documentation, basically song titles, what takes there are, and if it's a multi-track, it'll show the track counts that might be there. This, if you notice, if you've ever seen a reel-to-reel tape, this is what's called a pancake. It doesn't have a flange on it, so you have to be very careful because this can unspool itself and make a big mess. It can be put back, but it's not fun to do. But this was done because they were going through so much tape. Having two big metal flanges on the tape itself was just added shipping cost, and the tape machine runs just fine without them. So that's kind of what we have here. But with this was the primary mix down format in which these are stereo or mono tapes. So the multi-tracks over there is what the band would, the artist would record to, and each microphone or each instrument would have its own track, and then those tracks would be mixed with added reverberation and such to a quarter-inch tape. So oftentimes what we'll have is a multi-track tape with a certain catalog number, and then we'll find a quarter-inch tape with the same catalog number because it goes with that tape. Those go together. So keeping that association is important. But we will see names in here that also might sound familiar. Of course, I'm not looking at them, but Duke Williams, which is a local band in Trenton. Here we have B.B. King, who did a record at Sigma, and this is side 1 and side 2. Barbara Mason, Delphonics, The Whispers, some fairly significant. And here's another Whispers record, again, side 1 and side 2. So the mixes were assembled together and sent out for printing of a record. So that's what we have here, and this gets us to some of the oldest stuff here. Sigma started in 1968 in August, and here is August 9th, 1968. A Sonny Casella record. And so this is some of the oldest stuff. Some of the fun stuff in here that you will find, there is the band here called, I'm sorry to back you up again, Wildflower, which had a member of the band named Daryl Hall, long before Hall & Oates. And here's where, if any of you noticed that we did a record release out of here for the Nat Turner Rebellion, a lot of that material came from this era, late 60s, early 70s, quarter-inch tapes from Philly Groove Records. Because that was not Philly International, a lot of those tapes got left behind, and we had a great collection of that to go through. So I'm going to go now back to show you some of the tape machines that we have. By the way, this is test equipment that came out of Sigma's basement. So not only do we collect magnetic tapes, but we also collect some of the materials, objects from the studio itself. So back around the corner, here's some of our tape machines. Like I said, about 13 different formats. Machine readable tapes require the proper format to play back. So therefore you need lots of different machinery to do it. These two particular Scullies are 4-track half-inch machines. These actually came from Sigma. So those are Sigma machines. Here's another 4-track This machine's a 2-track, both 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch. This is a 32-track digital machine, which was popular for about 5 seconds in the late 80s, early 90s. 700 pounds of glory, 32 tracks. And then our Studer A827, which I can do 3 formats on: 2-inch 16, 2-inch 24, and 1-inch 8. And then all of the equipment that we use to digitize that. So I'm going to sit back down here for just a second, if that's okay, and then we can come back to the handheld and talk a little bit about the issues we have with preservation of magnetic tape and any type of sound recording. Starting in the late 1800s, sound recording was all of a sudden, sound recording in film, we all of a sudden had a way to capture events in time. And that's significant when you think about what we can see and hear, not just a still photograph, not just a description of an event, but we can actually see that event. I won't get too philosophical about the biases that are and the perspectives that come from a sound recording, because they're not objective entirely. But sound recordings, to me, are some of the most human materials there are, when you can listen back to someone who may not even be with us anymore, or you can hear a performance or a discussion. These things are hugely valuable as cultural heritage objects. But the problem with them is they were created with a machine, and they require a machine to play them back, which means preserving a tape on a shelf is important if you want to save it, but it doesn't do any good unless you can save the machine that also plays it back. We have a third problem. Obsolete media means that the machinery is obsolete and no one's making them. Therefore, you have to use obsolete equipment, and you have to find someone who can fix it. How do you find parts? How do you machine parts? You know, we're lucky here at Drexel, and we have Jeff Chestek as our tech for our recording studios, who can also fix and work through this equipment. But that expertise is disappearing quickly. So we have a clock ticking when it comes to AV heritage. The media will probably outlast the actual equipment that we need to play it back, and that is unfortunate. The other unfortunate thing is, in order to take and play an audio object on a machine, there are ways to mass digitize things, but for quality assurance, you really need a one-to-one transfers for your most important stuff. So therefore, it is incredibly resource heavy. It takes working equipment, it takes expertise, and time. And time is difficult to come by with limited resources. So that's when you hear horror stories of things getting lost, archival materials getting lost, oftentimes someone will immediately say, well, why wasn't it digitized? Why don't you just digitize it? And we would love to, but it's a daunting task to do that. So I just want to kind of paint that picture. With that, there's a couple of organizations that are near and dear to my heart that set standards by which to do this. One of them I used to be president of. I'm currently past president, the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives. We write the standards by which to deal with audio and video recordings. And it was determined many years ago that the proper preservation method for audio is digitization. Why? Instead of just keeping the object itself? Well, that obsolescence thing I mentioned, but also if you need to migrate the material, the only way you can migrate audio and video material without a degradation of generational loss from the migration is to do it in the digital domain. So the trick is you need to play back the tape as best you can, as close to the original sound as possible, digitize that as high of quality as you can, and then from that point on, you have a digital copy that you can now copy and migrate forever. But that's the problem there, is now there's a cost moving forward, because now it has to be migrated forever because file formats change, operating systems change. That becomes an issue in itself. So that comes into the digital preservation world and the problems that lie there. So that's kind of an overview of audiovisual material. Now I kind of want to look at some of the objects, maybe even demonstrate a particular set of tapes. So I'm going to jump back up here for a second to the tape machine. I'll be here and kind of up here. So I introduced you to this machine earlier, so I want to talk about some particular formats. I want to start though with, again, this was a big one for us because this was our first release that came from the archives, the Nat Turner Rebellion, that we did a couple years ago, and then we did a repressing for Record Store Day last year. The story here you're probably familiar with if you've seen it. A band on a local Philly record label that never had an album. They had lots of singles and lots of recordings, and they were trying to be shaped by the industry and never quite had it. So 50 years after those recordings were made, we did this. I point that out as a possible way to get the archives out of the building, is to do materials like that. And I'm showing that because I want to show this particular tape, which is very nondescript, and this actually looks like fax paper, was the first tape that I found off the shelves from the Nat Turner Rebellion from 1969, November 11th, 1969, with two songs that became their first single, A and B side, one of which is Tribute to a Slave, which we might listen to a little bit later, and Plastic People. Well, 1/4 inch and small pancake, and you can see the leader there, maybe, where there are the two songs cut out within that particular tape. But what I want to show you is a 2-inch tape and show you how massive that is. This is incredibly heavy, and across those 2 inches of tape is where, in this particular case, 16 tracks of audio, but it went up to 24 tracks eventually. Track count above that was possible, but in varying ways. I'm going to pop this machine on the machine and go to a particular song and play it, so you can kind of see the functionality of this. And hopefully you'll be able to see what a beast of a machine this is. As much heavy as these reels weigh, it requires very large motors. Get it to grab. Come on. There we go. Nope, not going to grab. All right. And I'm going to roll this back to a particular spot. Now, while that's rolling back, you have 16 tracks here. The documentation in the box will show you what is on each track. Bass is on track 1, bass drum track 2, snare and sock, which is hi-hat. So again, you kind of have to translate some of this. Drum overheads, guitar, piano, organ, guitar, strings, lead vocals, strings, backgrounds. So that's kind of the map and the metadata for each track on this. And then the takes and which takes are particularly here. Now, I pulled this particular tape up because it's from 1970. It's in really good shape. We have a problem with magnetic tape in that it oftentimes it gets sticky over time. It might be sticky brand new, but in order to, a lot of people will come in and say, oh, can I hear this tape? And oftentimes the answer is no. And that's just because that tape needs to have some remediation done to it before it can be played. And usually that means going into an oven. We have an incubator here at 55 degrees Celsius. Pop the tape in for a couple of days, maybe a week, because what happens is the oxide starts to fall off, sticks to the heads, gives you a terrible playback. Sometimes we'll stop the machine. So this particular tape is in good shape and won't do that. But the other thing about this is a band from Philly on Scepter Records called The Moods. They had a single out, this particular single, and I particularly enjoy this. I'm going to play a bit of this. Hopefully this will roll through the machine. Let me know if there's any problems with the audio. And I'll pop through some of these tracks so you can get a good glimpse of what's going on.
When I was just a kid, I pitched pennies every day on the corners, South Street. Then the city streets told me that the pennies wasn't hip as quarter. No way. I grew up hip to all the tricks and every game in town. Right on. Now I tune you in, turn you on from ultra rich to underground. Don't you want it all? Sick inside the mall. Do you know that they call me King Hustler?
So now what I want to show you while this is playing, because it needs a mix environment, we can listen to those individual tracks by themselves. There's the bass guitar. And there's the drums. Guitars, piano, and organ. One of the things I particularly like are the horns in this. Lots of trombones. So, I'll jump into this a little bit more. Once this is digitized, we now have fields like this where each one of those tracks is now a separate audio file. And in reality, this entire tape is that because there's multiple takes of this particular song. That happens to be this particular take that was finished. So you can see a progression of how these records were made. And then what was very interesting about this particular band, here's a song that's kind of painting the scene of life on South Street in Philly. If I close this, I'm going to close this session here and open up from 1971. The exact same song, and that exact same song by the same band, but a different singer. So they completely went into the studio and redid it again. Different key. All right, so that's just a little glimpse. I'm playing this particular one because I've always loved this track, and it's not a very well-known one. It wasn't on a major label. Collectors love this 45, so you'll see this around a bit. Now, I also want to play a few other things. Some of the quarter-inch tapes that we have, just a few examples of some of the stuff that we have in here and what they sound like. I want to start with the Nat Turner Rebellion, Tribute to a Slave. Just play a little bit of this. So that particular song was the first thing I heard from that band, and it struck me as a band to pay attention to, in that I started discovering more of that on the shelves before we put together this project, this album project. This particular song, as a Virginian, seeing a tape on the shelf that says Nat Turner Rebellion, I knew exactly what that was referring to. And what's fascinating by this song is it's invoking the spirit of Nat Turner, in that after that rebellion, no one knows where the body went. And they turn this around as, it's okay, because you're here with us all the time. I feel that to me was was a powerful statement of a song, to be from a band from Petersburg, Virginia, in the late 60s. All right, I want to play a few other things that, another very famous recording that came out of Sigma, the Stylistics. Now, as an audio engineer and as a music, popular music studies person, this song, stunning sounding. That coming off the tape is, if you could hear what that really sounds like, not over Zoom, it is one of the most pristine quality recordings that I can think of in this collection. A couple other things I just want to play quickly. Things came through that weren't necessarily Philly, but again, it became a center of production, so people came here. This one from DC, Chuck Brown.
Keep on doing that funky thing till your heart begin to sing. Take it right down to the bone, baby. Take it with you when you're gone. Whoa. Come on, back it on up. Let's back it on up. Back it on up, baby. Oh, God. Back it on up. Let's turn the light.
All right, so now, last thing I want to play before we open it up for questions. This morning, in a neighborhood forum, I live in Mount Airy. I don't know if you're familiar with that area. Someone posed the question, what would the slogan be for our neighborhood? And someone said, Mount Airy is the best, because that's a line in this song called Mount Airy Groove. This is from Pieces of a Dream, produced by Grover Washington Jr.
There are three boys from a mountain place called Toby Seay, showing you the way.
Just listen to the synthesizer and the drums are gonna show you all where we come from.
So you're rocking to the beat of Mount Airy. The freaky feet are just wait and see. The brothers Cedric, Kurt, and James, no other sound. It's quite the same. James on the keyboard, Cedric on the bass, and the drummer man Kurt keeps the beat on your feet. Let's groove.
Just get on down to the Mount Airy groove, cause I'm about to show you how. I said party people if you're ready to jam, and let me see if you came to get down. Just put your left hand in the air and give the funk sign, like you just don't care. Let me see if y'all came to party right. We're gonna party hard into the broad daylight. Who me? I'm D from Galaxy 5, and I make your body rock and get you all the way live. So just get on down to the Mount Airy groove. Party people, let me see you move. Let's move.
All right, so I'm going to end it there with that, and hopefully that was some enjoyable Philly music for you, and I'll open it up then to everyone. I know I wasn't comprehensive in this. There's a lot to cover, but
Well, let me thank you incredibly, Toby, for that terrific tour. And actually we'll turn over in a moment here to the comments and the questions, but I wanted to, I think the very first comment, the very first chat that was put out here was, I think expressed what a lot of us were feeling, at least those of us that can go back to this period, that you brought us back in. So thank you, Sophie, for starting that. So I'm also excited now to welcome a member of the Drexel University Black Alumni Council who came a little bit later, so I didn't introduce him before. We were sure he was going to be making it, but Bill Gunther is here. And during his undergraduate career at Drexel, he worked on the WKDU Black Experience in Music radio show and has a vast knowledge of Philly sound and music in general. So we're delighted that Bill offered to moderate the Q&A now, bringing his knowledge of radio and music to the conversation. Rachel Widener, who's our library's administrative assistant, who also brought the idea of this webinar up in the first place, has been monitoring the chat as well, and she'll read any comments that were sent directly to her. But Bill, since I didn't have a chance to welcome you when you first came, are you ready to launch your conversation with your own, maybe start with your own observation, and then you should be able to see the chat comments and pick from those from the audience as well. There's a couple of really good ones. So unmute yourself, Bill, and welcome, and thanks again, and let the Zoom screen be yours.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is, Toby, I enjoyed that immensely. It took me back to actually when the Stylistics made that song. I was actually an undergrad at Drexel at that time. So it took me back to the time when we began broadcasting, and that was a part of the sound that we brought to the radio at WKDU at that time. One of my partners, Don Henson, is on here, and Don, if you want to jump in here at any time, please feel free to do that. So basically, I graduated in '72, and my last year, we formed a conglomerate of undergrads with the assistance of George Wilson, who was, I believe, Vice President of Academic Affairs at that time. And he organized us to have a way to, creatively express our heritage in music. And out of that came the Black experience in music, which lasted, I don't know how long it lasted, long after I left college. And it was, we were honored and privileged to participate in it. And it was a diverse, we all had different musical tastes. So it was kind of unusual at that time on commercial radio where they stuck to a very rigid format. We were able to stretch out and, well, first of all, it was personal expression. And second of all, so we didn't have an actual program director telling us what to play. So each of us was able to express ourselves individually. And it was a lot of fun. And, we added a lot of different things in it. We had news and public affairs and community outreach as a part of the format. So I don't know, Don, is there anything you want to add to that, or?
I don't know that I have much to add. Again, it was a kind of a spirit. We didn't call ourselves disc jockeys, we called ourselves communicators. And I would say it was a core foundation around the music that we were expressing. And of course, it was, I think, appropriately labeled the Black experience in music. That was the core. We played a little commercial stuff, but the majority of it wasn't really commercial. We did some jazz, we did some, I did a little bit of Latin, some African, some Caribbean, but it was all, part of the Black experience. And we kind of prided ourselves on putting out, music that wasn't necessarily commercial, but it reflected the community. And it reflected, Black folks in general. And it was a broad mix of music.
So I don't know if this is really great to hear you guys. And I must say I overlapped you just about the same time, but I'm stayed as a graduate student. And this music was making it over to the Midwest where I was living at the time too. And so it really did have a nice broad stretch. I only wish we could be doing this in person, because I think several people were just ready to get up and dance. And that's really what we should be doing at this point. But I'm wondering if either Bill or Don, if you're looking at the questions, or maybe let's just have Rachel, because she's been monitoring, read out some of the questions from the comments.
I got lost there for
where you're going in there.
a minute or so.
Sure. So I'm happy to read off the first question. So I think the first question in chat was, once the tapes are digitized, will the recordings be released to the public? And he goes on to say that I think there might be an audience for many of the tapes. Oh, I think you're muted.
So the problem with that is we own the tapes, we don't own the intellectual property. So they're digitized, they're accessible, but as far as releasing, we can only do that like we did with the Nat Turner Rebellion album, because we got agreements from all the owners to do so. And that's a lot of work. That took 3 or 4 years to put that project together. So it is accessible. You can come here and listen to it. There are new exceptions in the new copyright law, which will help us be able to gain access to things. But at the moment, it can't just be released. But you are absolutely correct. There is absolutely big interest in a lot of the stuff. There was so much done here that was really well done that didn't make a big splash in the world, mainly because of label politics, or they didn't have the right person behind them, the marketing, or there's a album in here by a local prog rock band called Good God, and their album came out the day before Yes's Close to the Edge came out. No one noticed. So that's those kind of things happen. But yeah, there's a lot of interest, but we have to be very careful in protecting intellectual property.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and read the second question, which is, do you have the list of personnel for each track? Some of the horn players are probably still in the area.
I wish I did. The biggest problem we have there is the documentation. You saw that the one sheet that's oftentimes in the box, and there might be some more. They oftentimes label engineers and producers, but Sigma had a system by which they did that with initials. So if you know whose initials that is, it tells you who it is. When it came to the track itself, it oftentimes did not denote who the musician was unless there was multiples. For instance, oftentimes in a lot of these records, there's 3 guitar players. So the initials of the 3 guitar players, so you could know them apart, are on there, but it doesn't say anything about who the drummer is or who the bass player is. So with those type of situations, all we can do is go to the public record of what's there, and to participants who might have been there when it was recorded. It is unfortunate that there is no real means to know exactly definitively, especially when it comes to a string section and a horn section. You'll just have 2 sets of tracks that say strings, and it was a room full of string players, but I don't know who any of them are specifically.
I'm wondering if Bill or Donald, if you know any of the folks that were here, might still be in touch with any of the community, and if any of these players can get some insights into maybe for them, identify them.
No, actually, I wasn't from Philly. I, just arrived, came on campus, went to school, and didn't get involved in too much of what was happening musically, in the studio world.
I mean, it's possible we encountered some of the musicians at that time. As to who they are and whether they're still performing, I could not begin to tell you.
And I have a question for you guys. Those radio broadcasts, are there any recordings of those?
I don't know. I don't have any of them. Don, do you have any of your programs on tape?
Well, I have a couple of my shows, but I would say 20 years ago, I pulled my tape machine out of a box. It had been sitting in the box for a long time, and I'm assuming all of the lubrication either dried up or, fell out the motor. It made a terrible noise when I turned it on, and so I turned it back off. So if I could ever get my tape machine running again, I have some of my shows on tape.
I know where you can get some transferred, possibly.
Okay. So I might take you up on that.
Yeah.
I had to drop some stuff in chat there for you. If you all want to take a look at some of that stuff in my research about this event, I found some really great stuff. Some people have dug this out of the archives, and it's there. So if you guys want to, if everyone wants to check it out, put it in the chat. And there are a lot of questions. We only have a few more minutes left. I don't know if Bill or Don want to ask any specific questions for yourselves, or sort of pinpoint any of the questions coming in through chat.
see.
I'll say one
I see the
chat.
question.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, pay to play. I know that was a bit of a issue, I guess, around the time, the 70s. There were scandals involving inducements, we'll put it that way, for records to be played. I mean, since we were non-commercial, you know, we were fortunate when an A&R person brought us a record. A lot of times we played music from our own personal collections. And so we never encountered anyone pushing us or inducing us in any fashion to play something.
But it's really interesting to see how important radio was for sales. And having a marketing arm behind a record that could push it out has a lot to do with what we know and what we don't know when it comes to what we're familiar with. But the hit records, there's plenty of great records that could have been hit records that just weren't in the system in the right way. And it just goes to that, you know, that whole, not to bring this to an archival point of view, but, you know, archives aren't neutral in that someone has to determine what you're going to save, and that determination, it creates what materials are left to write history about. And it's just another avenue of that, you know. If people could pay to play and their record got to be a hit, people get to talk about their record. And it's certainly not a level playing field.
There's one question here, though, from Toby too, that brings it back to students. Actually, two sort of follow-ups here. One is what's the process for allowing music industry students to sample from the collection? It's really terrific to note here. It's and I will identify her to others. Cameron Vickens. There's currently a WKDU DJ here. Black experience in music is the foundation of what I do there now. And I thank you all for doing that.
That's great. As far as sampling is concerned, we don't really allow it, just because, I mean, they could, but they couldn't release anything. We can do it for educational purposes. They can do it to learn how to do those processes. But any release stuff, they would have to clear the samples. And I think someone had mentioned a question about how many artists in Philly were sampled, and it's a ton. I don't know if there's a definitive way to find that number, but there is a website that lists records that are sampled and how many times and by whom, and it's a huge list of records from Philly. So I know a lot of records have been sampled where I have the tapes here, and I know that the record that you hear was sampled from an LP and not these tapes, and it's just amazing the sonic difference and how the quality there. But yeah, it's an issue for sure.
These are great questions. Thanks again, everyone, for engaging. Here's a question. How are you documenting your work, Professor Seay?
Yeah, not as good as I wish I could, and I think that's probably a common scenario. We're documenting, I mean, the first thing is getting this under bibliographic control in a catalog. I worked on this for a while about the best way to, because this isn't the same, this audiovisual material is very different when you're cataloging something. For instance, you can have a book and there's this field called subject, and what's the book about? That's just not the case with a music recording or a tape that has 5 different songs on it. So some of those fields just don't make sense. So we started, in order to get a bulk done, we limited it down to about 10 fields that researchers mainly look for. And so we're working through that. We're almost through the room. We have a pretty good catalog at this point. The digitization process, we document things like condition, how the machines are calibrated for playback, what machine was used, how it was digitized, all the technical metadata that goes with it. And that is roughly it. Remember when I mentioned before about the extreme amount of resources necessary to do this, something's got to give. And if we did it where everything was documented perfectly, and we referenced all of the vocabularies and authority files we could, we would never get anything done. So I will admit that straight off, that our documentation is trying to hit the sweet spot to where we can get material digitized and people can find it. And those are the two things that are trying to meet in the middle.
I think as we're almost coming close, I have to insert a closing comment here, Toby, and we'll
Yes.
do this definitely offline, but this is where collaborating with the libraries finding I think there's something here that we could probably get resources to get this done, particularly using our students. We have so many here. Some have said it's a 50th anniversary. They'd love to use your space. I'm sure there'd be interest. And with that, I'd like to read the comment too from Matthew Lyons, who is our university archivist, that he's also making a point of context, which is one of the real values of having historic collections and archives that can be connected. And being at the university, that's one of our key interests, to see how we can bring for the users the connection. So as he says here, University Archives holds many of the WKDU's historical materials, newsletters, posters, logbooks, memos, and also audio recordings in various formats. So we need to organize and catalog the material, and are hoping eventually to digitize at least some of the recordings so they can be made available to researchers as well. So I think before we do this again, we should definitely have a conversation and see how we might collaborate to get something to work down, because there's ways of doing this. So
absolutely.
With that, absolutely terrific. I think people should unmute themselves and say either the whatever a sound is the Drexel Phillies heard versus called. Thank you very much to all of you, Donald and Bill, joining us. The conversation. We'll try to capture all these comments through this very next in recording. So, thank you so much. A round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
A round of applause. Thanks again. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks.